Hi, I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Caroline, how's it going today?
It's so good to be in the studio with you, Bryce.
I know. So those of you who listened to our last episode with Chris Nowinski, if you haven't, definitely go back and check it out. And by the way, tickets are still available for his event with us on Tuesday, when you're hearing this. But yeah, we were, of course, recording in different spaces. I was in my dining room.
I was in my office.
Yeah. So it's nice to get back in the studio. And I'm also getting over a cold, so I'm toughing through this one. And today's going to be a really fun episode.
I think
because we have a first-time guest. Brittany Le Blanc, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So most people probably know you on Twitter as @BritL. I know I follow you as well. So
do I.
Yes,
Thank
Caroline does as well. Let everybody know a little bit about yourself.
If you do not know who I am, which is very fair, I am @BritL on Twitter, Instagram. I am a local Edmontonian who's really passionate about the city. I'm a big nerd. I'm really passionate about nerd things. And I just think that we need to make the city better. And I share the passions and things I do along the way, whether it's Dungeons and Dragons, or talking about a new thing that's open in the city, or taking photos somewhere that's really cool, or my fave, the library, because I love the library so much. And so I'm very honored to finally be on the podcast, because I think right after you launched it, I was like, why am I not on this podcast immediately? Because I do love the library, and I yell about the library a lot to people. So
we appreciate the support. And things got a little controversial on Twitter, last month, I think it was, with the whole library design. So there's several people who jumped to our defense. So obviously we really appreciate the love.
And we make fun because we care.
Yes.
And I personally am really excited about the Bibliotank. I think it's going to be great.
I do too. All the staff are. We've kind of now internally embraced the tank, but it's all good. Everybody's having fun with it, and I think everybody's definitely going to love the new library. One other thing too I want to quickly mention is you're also a marketer like myself.
Yes.
So Caroline, normally I'm outnumbered by librarians on the show. You're outnumbered by marketers.
Okay. I don't know what that means, but I guess we'll find out.
I mean, it means that you're going to have a lot of promotion. We'll be taking a lot of photos later.
Definitely.
It'll be great.
Yeah, I do like staying to the brand. You know, when we talk with my talking points, that's what I'm thinking of. So I'm excited about that.
So before we get into it today, Caroline, did you receive any feedback from our kids episode that came out a few weeks ago?
I have just heard such great things. People really enjoyed listening to the kids episodes. It was so much fun to listen back and to hear what they talked about. I know that we got some positive comments on Facebook, and people were enjoying it on Twitter, so I'm really glad that we were able to put that together.
The one thing I had to laugh at, I spoke with a couple staff members, so Karen Chidiak, who also works in marketing, and her two daughters, Gabby and Isabella, of course, were on the show. And so I was like, so what did they think of the episode? And Karen goes, they thought it was pretty good, but the one thing they couldn't get over was they didn't like the sound of their own voice. So, I mean, everybody says that the first time they hear themselves back on something.
You know what's weird, though? Since starting being on the podcast, I don't have a problem listening to myself, and so I've discovered this. So I don't know what that means. It's probably not great, but I'm sure if they join us again on the podcast, they'll get used to the sound of their voice.
Yeah, they're always welcome back.
Yeah.
So let's share some of our own Overdue Finds picks that we've been enjoying since our last episode. Brittany is our guest. Let's start with you.
All right. So really fitting in on theme, I have started listening to, I'm a big audiobook fan, so I was listening to a series called The Perfect Gentleman, and I will set the scene for you. It's a bunch of guys who went to a prestigious school together, and they've all been groomed to be CEOs and the president and things like that, but there's also a scandal. And over the series, they all partner up with cool women who also help them unravel this crazy scandal. And it's a lot of fun. The library, unfortunately, does not have all the audiobooks. I have requested them, though. Love that feature. And I guess I will just have to read the rest of the series, and that's good. So I'm very excited to finish it.
So it sounds like there's a lot of perfect gentlemen in the book.
The series name is a little bit not the best, but it's actually really fun if you're into action-y thriller books with a little bit of romance. It's in there.
Nice. That sounds pretty entertaining.
Yeah.
It is. It's a lot of fun.
How is the narrator in the series?
It's actually one of my favorite narrators. So he also has narrated the Pamela Claire series, the I-Team investigation series, which is also one that I really like. So I find him very soothing. I think it's really interesting to listen to the different narrators. I think he does a really good job of doing everyone's voices, whereas if you listen to like the Game of Thrones narrator, I had to stop listening to it because he was doing the crow sounds, which please never do crow sounds in a book. It was very jarring. And he was very bad at doing women's voices because I think sometimes when men do women's voices, they do like a really weird like hi da da da, and it's not realistic, and it kind of like is jarring and takes you out of it. But I think he does a really good job.
Yeah, you would think they would, for something like Game of Thrones, they could get a crow sound effect.
Yeah, that's very odd that they would leave it up to the narrator.
Or
to
just
do it.
don't. Like I don't need to hear a crow sound. I understand there's a crow there. You could just say a crow caws, and I would understand
Yeah.
it. You wouldn't have to make the sound, and I'm not going to make it because it was so jarring. And I sometimes listen to audiobooks like while I'm driving or while I'm sleeping or like heading to sleep or whatever, and it was too much. I couldn't handle it.
I just recently got into audiobooks myself, and I find them perfect for the commute. I catch the train every day, and as somebody who notoriously is a slow reader, which I've talked about a lot on the show, they're a lifesaver.
Yeah.
Caroline, how about you?
I have a book that I read recently. It was called Moon of the Crusted Snow by Wabagijig Rice. I discovered this book because I went to a book launch for the anthology This Place, 150 Years Retold. And Richard Van Camp was there because he's in the anthology. And he was talking about this book, and I thought, well, I have to read it. It sounds so great. So the premise of this book is that it's set in an Anishinaabe reserve in northern Ontario, and winter is approaching. And first, all the people in the reserve, they lose cell phone service and the internet. And they think, okay, well, this happens sometimes. It'll come back on. It doesn't. Then they lose power. Then the supply truck stops coming. Then they find out that there is like chaos happening down south in the cities, and it's kind of like this apocalypse situation.
Wow.
And so this question of how is this community going to take care of itself? How are they going to take care of each other? What is it like when you are cut off from the rest of the world? Some people are quite comfortable dealing with this situation because there are people on the reserve who remember what it was like before they had power and water and all these services coming, and then other people can't go 2 days without their phone and before they start twitching. And then I just started thinking about how terrible I would be in an apocalyptic situation. Not only do I have to Google instructions for everything I do, but like if my electricity goes out, how much canned food do I have?
I think about this all the time
Yeah.
because I think always if I don't know something, I can watch a YouTube video about
course.
it. I can, go on lynda.com and like learn a new skill. It's like I can learn things really easily.
Yeah.
But if we're in an apocalypse situation where there's no power and like now the internet doesn't work,
Yeah.
I can't YouTube how to grow a plant. I have to like go and actually learn the skill myself.
Even
So-
if there were landlines, whose phone numbers do I know anymore? Like, I'm going to be calling my friends from childhood and hope someone picks up at their house because those are the only numbers I have memorized.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a really unsettling book because the first half is like this kind of slow crawl towards. It's a really unsettling book because the first part of it is just this slow crawl towards something happening, and then some outsiders come and you don't really know what their deal is, and you just kind of wonder how this is going to resolve itself. And so I really enjoyed the book. Wabagijig Rice is a journalist and author and the host of Up North, a CBC radio show in Northern Ontario. So very interesting.
That sounds really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely going to check that out.
Yeah.
I picture it in my head already.
Yeah. It was very good.
Yeah, cool.
What have you been enjoying, Bryce?
So I've talked about this also on the podcast a few times. I'm a really big fantasy hockey nerd.
Yes.
When this episode comes out, we are going to be 2 weeks away from puck drop, which means for nerds like myself, that means it's hockey pool season.
Okay.
So to get ready for hockey pool. I'm going to give all the poolies out there a little tip. Through our RB Digital service, you can get the Hockey News Ultimate Fantasy Hockey Guide for free. So right now, if you go to the newsstand, you'll see it there. Connor McDavid, of course, is on the cover. It's like $10 or $12. But yeah, I'm encouraging people to go, especially if you are a poolie or you have any poolies in your family, tell them to go to our website and check that out through RB Digital. And we'll have a link to it, of course, in our show notes. But it's nice because this guide, of course, gives you a points preview of how everybody is supposed to do in the season. So I've got my ideas on how I think certain players will do. So it's always interesting to get, picks, I guess, from the experts, if you will, on where they think certain players will finish, maybe who some sleeper players are, some rookies to look out for. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's for you hockey nerds out there, definitely go check it out.
So I know you don't want to give away all of your secrets going into this, but what is one thing to keep in mind when you're creating a fantasy? A
lot of people don't think the later rounds in a draft are important. Obviously, the first few rounds is where you pick your Connor McDavids, if you will, and your Sidney Crosbys of the world.
The people I've heard of.
Yeah. But in the later rounds, though, of course, those are where you can get kind of some sleeper picks. And that's where, in my opinion, you're going to win your draft.
Okay.
So those later rounds. You got to take some flyers on maybe some guys who, if you're looking at last year's stats, maybe they only played part of the year, so their stats don't look great. But don't sleep on those guys.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to make a note to check in with you every couple recordings to see how your pool is doing.
Yeah, hopefully this doesn't slowly turn into a gambling podcast, but I'm sure the library would put a stop to that right away. But maybe I'll give updates throughout the season.
Yeah, well, I will be curious to hear how it goes.
Yes. All right, so I just realized at the beginning of the episode we were super excited to have Brittany here.
Yeah.
We didn't even really talk about what we're going to be talking about on this episode.
Surprise!
So guess what? We're going to be talking about guilty pleasures today. And Brittany, I think you're the perfect person to have on the show because I know when Holly Arneson, who's also been on the show before, she let me know.
Friend of the show, Holly.
Friend of the show, official friend of the show. She let me know that obviously she ran into you at K-Days and she was like, Brittany's still waiting for her invitation to come on Overdue Finds. So
I think I probably yelled at Holly for like a half an hour of me just being like, let me tell you about how much I love the library and why this is important to everybody, and also about all these terrible books that I read. She was probably horrified, so I'm happy she passed it along, though.
Yeah, so she mentioned to me in the email that I don't want to spoil it because we were going to get in there in a moment, but you mentioned to me a genre of books, which I thought, I'm not sure if we could talk about this for a whole episode, but this kind of led into the whole discussion.
I easily could.
Yeah, I think Brittany was challenge accepted.
Yes, definitely.
So
that's all right. Because obviously we're talking about guilty pleasure picks today. And before we get into our picks, because Caroline, I know you feel very passionately about this term.
I do.
Guilty pleasure. So how does something earn this name? And Caroline, I want to get your thoughts on this subject because this has come up before, and you have some strong thoughts.
I do. So after we heard you wanted to be on the show, Brittany, Bryce kind of contacted me and was saying, "What do you think about doing a guilty pleasures episode?" And I said, "Great. I reject the whole premise of guilty pleasures because I feel very strongly that there should not be this guilt associated with what people read, what they watch, what they listen to. And that when we start to look at it, I think that there's a bit of a history of what is considered a guilty pleasure and the kinds of things that we talk about. It is often genre books as well. So anything that deviates from this idea of classic literature can often be termed a guilty pleasure, and it can be really gendered as well, particularly around young girls and young women, and this idea of often equating it to what teen girls like, and this idea of that being used to put something down because that is an audience that is not maybe valued. And so throughout history, I think there are connections to the things that are gendered and genred, and I was really proud of that phrase. But what I said to you, I said, I'm going to say my piece, and then I'm not going to derail the whole episode because I think it is worth talking about what things are considered guilty pleasures and kind of shining a light on what it would be like if we said, no, I don't feel guilty. This is what I like, and I like it, and I want to talk about it.
One thing I just want to touch on, it just kind of reminded me of the kids episode. And the one thing I thought was really cool was a couple of the guests, a couple of kids on that episode had said that they're really big fans of the Babysitters Club.
Yep.
So to me, it's funny because I wasn't familiar with the graphic novels. I just kind of thought of the books from the 90s. And I was like, oh, it's kind of odd that these kids are really into this, more specifically the boys. So you brought up a really good point there.
Yeah, and I think that looking through it, especially with some of the genres, this idea of romance often being a guilty pleasure. We know that women are huge drivers of the romance market. We've had Beth Kilfoy on in the past, and she's talked about the numbers that drive the romance publishing industry and how huge it is. And I think that there's value in examining this concept of guilty pleasures, and I'm really happy we're talking about it today because I'm so excited about some of the stuff we're going to get to. But I did want to say that first, I reject the idea. And Brittany, I know we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording.
Because I also reject the idea.
Oh.
I own all of the pleasures that I find in these books. I don't believe that you should feel guilty. I also feel it's genred. I feel it's gendered. If a man is listening to the new Taylor Swift album, we shouldn't be like, oh, that's a guilty pleasure. Nah, just love Taylor Swift. Enjoy that album if you want to enjoy that album. Things like romance novels, I think, are constantly not viewed as serious fiction and therefore are guilty pleasures. But if you look at romance novels, often that's where you find the best character development and the best studies of character in novels, because you have to make a character that is flawed yet interesting, that you care about the emotional journey that they're going to be going on. And that's not something that you find in a lot of other genres. I think that you find it in some of them, but often the ones that have more of a romance, you have to care about that character and you have to be there along the way and along the stumbling. So I think it's actually, I think romance novels should be heralded a lot more, and I definitely think there's some silly ones, and I have a lot of fun with them. But I do think that a really good romance novel is one of the best authored books that you can get.
Yeah, and I think when one of your questions there, and that was, how does something become a guilty pleasure? Yeah. And I think that there's anything that goes against kind of a social norm of how people, and I'm putting this in air quotes, but should be, or how people want other people to see them. And quite often that's as serious, as cultured, as someone who spends their time wisely, reading the great works of fiction, watching the classic movies, all of this. And if you're like, yeah, actually I'm an adult who reads the Babysitter's Club, then that is like, oh, well, what's wrong with you? Because if something has to be wrong for this to be the case, otherwise you would be reading something with more, again, quote, value.
Well, and I think that that's true of people who read graphic novels. People often are like, oh, comics is for children. And I mean, graphic novels tell powerful stories in a very unique medium. And I think that they're amazing, and there's some really great ones. I mean, there's also some terrible ones, but there's some really good ones. It can be a really amazing thing. I think YA is another thing that people often say, oh, you're reading YA, that's just for children. Like, why are you reading this? Oh, it's Twilight. And I've gone to the bat for Twilight quite a bit. But I also think that, YA, they tell really interesting stories, and they're talking to people who haven't felt like there are books for them. So I'm 100% behind it. I will say that when I was invited and I told some friends, they were like, oh, that's interesting that anyone thinks that you feel guilty about anything.
I saw that comment on Twitter.
Yeah, that was one of my friends, and they also were like, so do they know that you just talk about these books all the time to everyone, and these are just like your pleasure books? They're not even guilty. You're just, yes. And I think, guess what? I just talk about them all the time. So I'm very excited to talk more about them today.
That's cool. We're going to get into some really good picks. And yeah, it's something that I struggle with some of my own likes. I've talked about it on the show. I enjoy watching professional wrestling. Yeah. But I know it's something that my friends have mocked me for. Cheryl bugs me about it at home. So yeah, I mean, it's I think it's one of those things too where I look at it as it's something that you're almost kind of embarrassed about liking, and I know you shouldn't be, but for for some of us, we still get that feeling.
But it's a really interesting and entertaining medium, and the way that they do storytelling through wrestling, I think is so unique. It's such a unique art form, and so for me, I wouldn't be the first person to WrestleMania, but I've watched professional wrestling before. I think it's really interesting. I think there's a lot of fun things that you can get into there. And so, no, don't be guilty about it, because it's just a different form of storytelling.
Absolutely.
And some of these things change over time. I know previous guest, Amy Wright, was on and was talking about comics, and comics are for everybody, and how attitudes have changed. Because I know for a fact that librarians, as the only librarian in the room, I will take this one, that we were often held ourselves out as gatekeepers. And so Nancy Drew Hardy Boy's serialized books for children were seen as not worthwhile to have in a collection. And so it was many decades later before kind of serialized books would be part of a library collection, because they did not see that as their mandate. And so now we know the importance of getting kids into reading and finding things that they're interested in and motivating them, and how there are benefits to serialized books. But attitudes can change over time, and that's another part of it as well.
Well, one of the things I mentioned in our adulting episode too was, I talked about, sometimes I'm almost 40, I still love reading graphic novels, but you go back 20 years or so, 20, 30 years, even past that, you would never see adults reading stuff like graphic novels or comics. And I mean, there still was, obviously, but it's definitely become more common out there, to see a lot more acceptance, I guess, of the genre.
Well, and there was such a stigma around it, and I think there still is in some circles. But I look at, speaking from the marketer's perspective, there's been a lot of work being done where people have done, read comic books in public day, and encouraging more women to get into comic books and graphic novels. And there's been a lot of work also in making those graphic novels more accessible to everybody. So I look at something like Gem and the Holograms, which, nostalgic favorite for me. When they brought the new comic, they made sure to redesign the characters so there's different body types, so there's different types of people and different things that are represented in those comics. And so it was very thoughtful. And it was nice to see a different type of person and to have a little bit more of something you could relate to in those novels. So
I am at risk of bursting into song based on Gem and the Hologram since you brought it up. So let's get in now and talk a bit more specifically about what are some of our maybe guilty pleasure reads that we now do not acknowledge as guilty pleasures.
That's right. We fully accept them. Brittany, I know you're buzzing over there.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
I am so ready. Buckle up, everyone at home. Paranormal romances. My favorite. I love them. The library does not have nearly enough of them. For some reason, you have been denying all the copious requests that I send in. I love a good, trashy paranormal romance, and I want people falling in love with ghosts. I want people falling in love with different shapeshifters that are werewolves, and also cats, and also all kinds of other things. I am a sucker for any of those things. There is I think it's Shelley Lawrenston writes an entire series about different types of shifter animals, and some of them are Siberian tigers and lion shifters, because they've had
shift into both.
The mom was one, and then the dad was the other. So now they're a Siberian tiger lion.
Oh,
and so, and then it's interesting because the way they transform is oh no, and then they were made fun of when they were a kid, and so it's just interesting. Or this person's now a polar bear, and then they are on a hockey team, and so it's really interesting to see the mashups of kind of those things, because I really enjoy when it's, this person is a hockey player, but he's also a polar bear. How does that story work? And I think it's always really interesting and really fun, and it allows you to have a little bit of goofier things that happen in there, but also keeping some interesting romantic elements and some interesting storytelling elements. And I really enjoy the fantasy sci-fi-ness of it.
Do you have favorite tropes in these stories?
I have, yes. The number one, the best trope of all time.
I'm ready. I'm so ready for this.
They meet each other and hate each other, and then they fall in love. Yeah. Number one, best trope. It's the best thing ever. My two best friends and I, if there's ever a fanfic written about something that's like that, or a romance novel that we find, or a movie that's coming out, as they're like, oh, these two are now enemies, but they have to work together. One of my favorites, Julie James writes a whole series, and it's not paranormal, sorry, it's about lawyers, which is not as exciting. And
they don't shapeshift at all.
I know, nobody shapeshifts.
Nobody turns into a polar bear.
I don't understand why these books don't have more shapeshifters in them. They can be lawyer shapeshifters, like a badger who's also a lawyer. It's great. So this series is all about a lawyer, and in the first book, lawyer, she hears a murder, she overhears a murder, so now she has to help with the whole murder investigation. And who's she working with? An FBI agent who they don't get along because they crossed paths earlier and some bad things happened. And then do they fall in love? I don't know, but it's pretty great.
Have to read it to find out.
So much tension, who knows? But I love that because I love that kind of will they, won't they tension, and it's so amazing. And you have to be able to, like, going back to what I said about romance novels, you have to be able to build these characters who are tense and who fight each other and have, like, differences, but without taking it so far that the people are, like, irredeemable. You need to be able to understand that this person is doing this thing and they're doing it for a reason and they're not just being terrible. Because one of the things, I love Buffy the Vampire Slayer, for example, but if you watch it now, there's so many episodes, you're like, pick up the phone and call that person. If you picked up the phone and told that person what was happening, this would not be a problem.
Yeah.
And I think the entire, like, was it season 6? I think most of season 6 is just like, pick up a phone, talk to each other, have a good heart-to-heart, be adults about this. The season's over. And so obviously phones were different at that time. But, like, that's so frustrating. When you're reading a novel and that person is so frustrating, it gets to a point where you just want to stop reading it. You return the book to the library and you never talk about it again. So I think that it's a talent to be able to create such a story that you're so engaged with the entire way through.
Absolutely. Bryce, what about you? What are you reading?
You know what? So I guess this is mine. I swear I won't just talk about wrestling on this episode, even though I could.
Is this our wrestling episode?
We have talked about doing the wrestling episode.
Is it a secret wrestling episode?
I feel like every episode is a secret wrestling episode because wrestling does come up a lot.
It does, yeah. I try and really curb my wrestling talks. I know it's not for everybody.
But today we're letting it out.
We are letting it out.
We're owning it and letting it out.
Yeah, definitely. So mine would have to be, you talk about, like, you work in a library, you must read the classics and everything. So even though I'm not a librarian, but I am a sucker for wrestling biographies.
Yeah.
Oh.
They're really good. The one I have to recommend in particular, I think it's the best one, is Bret Hart's biography called Hitman, My Real Life in the Cartoon World of Wrestling. The thing is, like, in the library, not that many people know this, we have a ton of wrestling biographies. Not all of them are good. And Bret Hart's, though, is actually the best. Apparently, when he was on the road during the 80s, he kept a diary. So his biography is very accurate, I would say. There's a lot of former wrestlers who release their book, and they're very short, maybe 200 pages. They take some liberties with the truth, so kind of wrestling nerds like myself are like, actually, that's not who you wrestled at WrestleMania 5, or no, you lost to that guy in a steel cage match. But that for me is my, I guess, my guilty pleasures that I enjoy reading. Like, I know there's other books that will come out. I'm like, you know what? I've never really read, say, like, anything by Charles Dickens, but oh my God, there's a book out on the life of the Ultimate Warrior. I must read this.
So I have a question. Mm-hmm. Do they read their own biographies, like audiobook-wise?
Some of them do, others don't. It's funny because I don't think I've actually listened to a wrestling, like an audiobook version of one yet.
I have to say, like, if you can get a biography that's read by the person who wrote it, oh my God, it's so much better. Like Alan Cummings, like autobiography.
Oh yeah.
He so good. It was so amazing. And I'm not normally a biography person, but I was trying to dip my toes in other audiobook waters, and it was amazing. So I definitely, Because if Bret the Hitman Hart is like going to be talking in your ears about his stories, like how great is that?
The one I want to read is by Jim Ross, and he's famous wrestling announcer. So I know that we do have his audiobook. I haven't looked to see whether or not he narrates it, but if he narrates it, that's going to be my next listen.
Oh my gosh, that would be so good.
Yeah. It's just
when I listened to the audiobook of Mindy Kaling's books, and I listened to it, I was on the bus riding around, and it was like I was hanging out with my funny, cool friend, and we were just having a ball. Oh, that's sad, but it's also great.
But it is, and it's nice to hear how they are phrasing things. Because I know, like, Sachi Cool's book, so good, and having her read and tell those stories, so awesome. It's so great to hear, and it's like being with a friend and kind of learning more about this person.
Yeah. Caroline?
Yeah.
How about you?
Well, mine, Brittany already made reference to it. My guilty pleasure read is fan fiction. I'm a character reader. I talked about this. I think it came up in the Game of Thrones episode because we were talking about the petition to rewrite the final season, and my kind of takeaway was just go write some fan fiction or just go read some. It's out there. And I'm a character reader. So once there are established characters that I like, I will follow them pretty much anywhere, whether it's their coffee shop, university, whether it's where they meet in the workplace and they don't get along, but then they do get along. Then they have to go somewhere and there's only one bed.
Oh my gosh, the best trope. I love that.
I'm in, and I think it is becoming more mainstream. Like it's not a new thing by any stretch. Star Trek is often pointed to as part of the larger fan fiction
I think that's how
conversation.
It started,
yeah, and but you find it with like Sherlock Holmes. You find it really any kind of reinterpretation of existing works. Like you can get so broad with that, and some recent examples like Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, where one of the author, she's in a creative writing program at university and she only writes fan fiction, and her professor's like, no, this doesn't count, and then she's like, I'm gonna write it anyway. So there are these ongoing conversations about the artistic merits of fan fiction, but especially over, I would say, the last year, when I've said publicly, probably even on the podcast, I haven't been reading very much. That's not true. I've read like tens, hundreds of thousands of words in fan fiction. It's just not existing in the printed form. So is there like a website or something you would recommend people to go to check some stuff out, or is it you just kind of have to search based on, I guess, the characters you really want to read about? I find the search function on Archive of Our Own, AO3, to be the easiest to find. It recently was a Hugo Award winner for interactive fan media, I believe. But there's lots of stuff on the internet. So
AO3 and I think fanfiction.net are kind of the two big ones. I have to ask, because I also love fanfiction, what was your first fanfiction foray? What got you into fanfiction? That's a really good question, and I don't remember. I know it was a long time ago, because there is one piece of fan fiction that I can remember so vividly, and I know based on where it happened, it was a Gilmore Girls fan fiction, and based on where it happened in the run of the series, it had to be pretty early on, and it's no longer out there. I can't track it down, and so every now and then I just do like a little search to see if I can track it down. But it was probably I think it was this sense of, I don't want this experience to end. And so I find that often when, if I see a movie, especially something that has a number of characters or there's a bigger plot. I also, as I said, I'm a character reader, but I like the quieter scenes. Recently in Avengers Endgame, there is a jump in time of 5 years. That's the most interesting part to me. What was happening during those 5 years? I want to know that. I want to follow these characters to therapy. I want to follow these characters as they figure out what to do. That's what I want. And I recognize that maybe not
everyone wants that, so I'm happy to be existing in the fan fiction world.
You know what? Disney just announced a bunch of these like Marvel shows that will be on the Disney Plus streaming network.
Yeah.
None of them really piqued my interest. That I would watch.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've often said, if they ever made a 3-hour movie, and it was especially around the Age of Ultron years, if they ever made like a 3-hour movie that was just, here are the Avengers hanging out and doing daily life things and just being friends, I would be the first in line. Like, I would buy so many tickets for that because it's so interesting to me, because I think the characters themselves and the fact that they're people doing things is very interesting.
Yeah.
Do you read fan fiction?
No, you know what? I never have. I know. I'm missing out.
Bryce, I don't understand, because I know that there's wrestling fan fiction.
There probably is.
I'm
Although, you know
real
what?
person fan fiction,
I would agree.
it can get uncomfortable.
So would this count as fan fiction? A lot of, still a dork can go to the odd message board. Sometimes on like Reddit, people will, I guess this is fan fiction, people fantasy book what they think they would like to see at WrestleMania or other big events.
I think
they're like, I would put this guy over this guy. This is where I'd go with this storyline. So I guess that's kind of fan fiction. It's not quite the same.
I definitely count it.
Yeah.
For me, my entry to fan fiction was also a missing year situation.
Yeah.
Dragon Ball Z. There was a missing year. And during that missing year, Vegeta and Bulma got together. And I don't know if this means anything to you, but
It doesn't, but you know what? I would read it.
It means something to other people, I'm sure. But basically, this guy who was a bad guy and like the main female protagonist got together, and they're just together. And then they have a son, and you just like, it's very much just like ... They're together now, and nothing is ever really covered there. I read so much fan fiction to cover that, and like, how did they get together? What happened? The AUs, where they're now in high school. Oh no, they're back on the Saiyan planet, and now Bulma's a Super Saiyan fighter. It's somebody out there is going to be listening to this and be like, yes, anime. But yeah, no, I definitely, like, that got me into fan fiction, because I was just like, I want to know what happened. And then people are so creative in coming up with these stories, and I love it.
Yeah, so
I have to go just clearly read more fan fiction here. Let's do a search.
I recommend it.
Yeah.
And one of the recent pieces of ways that people have talked about fan fiction, 50 Shades of Grey had its origins as a Twilight fan fiction, and you can see some of that in the finished process. And the Twilight series and 50 Shades of Grey was brought up by a staff member at EPL when we asked what are people's guilty pleasures. And touching on something you said earlier about you work at the library, so you must read the classics.
Yeah. So I love this comment, by the way. So Mike Eaton, who's also provided with us with a few comments on some past episodes. I just want to read what he says here. As a bit of a preface, I also don't generally believe in the idea of guilty pleasures. So Caroline, I know you love that.
I did.
But anyway, I get a lot of customers who say things like, "Oh, you're a librarian, so you must read lots of classic literature." It makes me think about the 2 Mac Bolan paperbacks I have in my backpack at any given time. Those books are the literary equivalent of 1980s action movies. And as dumb as they are, I adore them with all my heart.
That line, I just love it, because that's what we got a lot of comments from staff. We're going to read some of them on the podcast today, but it was so hard to cut any of them out, because the passion that people were talking about their favorite things was great. I wasn't familiar with this.
Neither was I. I had to look up Mac Bolan. Brittany, have you ever heard of this?
But now I'm going to look it up.
Okay, so you have to do a search for it, because basically every single book cover looks like a straight-to-video 1980s action movie. It looks awesome.
Yeah.
And so I did also a little bit of research, because now I want to read them. There are over 600 Mac Bolan books. They started being published in 1969. Basically, they were all against, like, this guy Mac Bolan. He was fighting the mafia, I guess, which was really big at the time. And yeah, over 600 novels, and they've sold over 200 million books. This is a huge series.
Yeah.
I've never heard of it until yesterday.
So thank you, Mike, for sharing that series with us.
So I've talked a lot on this podcast about my music tastes, how terrible it is. But I want to know, Brittany, do you have any favorite groups or songs that I guess you might consider to be a guilty pleasure?
I guess like one of my more secretive loves is 90s country music, which is weird because like most of my day I'm listening to Lizzo and Carly Rae and that kind of stuff, and Paramore and 90s country. I don't know why. I just like it takes me back to a different time, and the songs are not always where I would like them to be progressively, but there's some really fun gems there.
So what are we talking about here?
So, I mean, we're talking like some Brooks and Dunn, like we're talking Diamond Rio, Shenandoah, we're talking Pam Tillis, we're talking some, I mean, I will put some Dolly Parton in there even though I think it's a little bit era different. Just like all that kind of stuff.
So say if something like Shake the Sugar Tree comes on.
Oh my gosh, yes, Shake the Sugar Tree. I was talking with somebody about how, so Lone Star came to K-Days this year, and I was there in the rain under my umbrella singing along to all their songs because that's just like a specific era to me, and I love it so much. And it was very interesting because I was definitely like it was a different demographic of people, and so it was really interesting to see who showed up for a show like that. But yeah, I like Alan Jackson, Reba McEntire, like yes, that was a really, really fun period, and I liked it a lot.
We have Sirius Satellite in our vehicle, and Cheryl always has it on the 90s country station.
Yes.
She loves listening to that stuff. Yeah. I'm not a big country fan, but even I know, just by osmosis, I know most of it anyway.
Yeah, well, this wasn't country, but another staff comment we had from Katie Terzansky was, as I sit at my desk listening to Believe by Cher,
yes.
I can't avoid mentioning that pop alternative from 1996 to 2003 is my life soundtrack. So there's a lot of love for this kind of era. And I recently realized that 95% of the concerts I go to are people that I loved from 1995 to 2005. So if I found you after that, it's not enough to get me out of my house. So my guilty pleasure for music, and when we were talking about this episode, we were coming up, and I emailed Bryce, and I was like, Bryce, I hope that it's not considered a guilty pleasure that I was at the Backstreet Boys concert last night screaming the lyrics at the top of my lungs, because I do not feel guilty about that. So I had to think about what it might be, and my pick is a song, and it is You're the Inspiration by Chicago.
Oh, I love Chicago.
I don't even know if this is you would know.
I think it was on the Karate Kid Part 2 soundtrack.
I don't know. And this is really interesting to me. If I can put on like this faux psychological sociocultural piece that like I think it has to do with like really romantic ballads from the 1980s. When I was developing my ideas of what romance was, basically, if a soap opera super couple would have slow danced to it, I am on board. And so, You're the Inspiration. I'm just like, thank you.
Very soft filter on the lens as they slow dance. I can picture it.
I mean, not a ballad, but Aha, Take on Me is like one of the most romantic songs of all time.
Yeah.
I saw Chicago in concert last year. Were you there too?
No, where?
They played at the Jubilee.
Really?
It was awesome. I sat in the second row, and I think I was the youngest person there. I went by myself.
Nice.
Cheryl had homework that night, so I was just like, I just went, and it was one of the best concerts I've ever been to.
Yeah.
And there was like people dancing to You're the Inspiration when it came on.
Yeah. And this is one of these, like, I feel like it's a guilty pleasure. I feel like it's one of these things, like, if I came out, and I'm not even saying that it's my favorite song of all time, but if I'm just like, oh yeah, I really like that song. It's like, We Built This City has a reputation of that, of just being like, no, sometimes I just like to jam out to it.
Yeah. Chicago's kind of this odd band where it's like they started out in the 70s, and they were kind of like this blues, funk, and then in the 80s they morphed into this like cheesy like romance ballad band. And it was a really good concert though.
Yeah. We have I think a couple Chicago's greatest hits CDs in the collection.
They have like 4 or 5 greatest hits. It's odd.
They have amassed the ability to have 4 or 5 greatest hit CDs.
Yeah.
So check those out. We'll have the lists in our show notes.
One of our other coworkers, Carol Ma, who I know listens to every single show, she goes, my not so guilty pleasure is K-pop. I started listening to it in elementary and junior high, and I keep going back to it because everything is well produced, and there are so many earworms. Gangnam Style is only the tip of the iceberg. And she recommends BTS and Twice. So BTS actually just last week won 2 VMAs, and they're even UN ambassadors. Brittany, are you a big K-pop fan?
So I'm not enough to pick out specific bands, but I really enjoy K-pop. When I listen to it, it's amazing. And also the music videos for K-pop, unreal. They put an effort into music videos that almost nobody else does. So definitely, if you are not a K-pop fan, go check it out. You will become a K-pop fan.
So Bryce, what about you? Did you have any?
You know what? I think I touched on Chicago. I love Chicago. If you look through my phone right now, you're like, oh my God, you should just marry Chicago because you love them so much. I guess my other one, I brought this up just in case new listeners haven't listened to past episodes, but I love TV theme music. I have, stuff like the theme from Miami Vice on my phone, Magnum PI. It just takes me back to childhood. It's really cool. And actually, through Hoopla, we have a great TV themes collection. So you can listen to that and drive around Edmonton listening to Van Jammer's Miami Vice theme music. It's awesome.
So switching over to movies and TV, what are some of your picks that might be considered guilty pleasures? Brittany.
Oh my gosh. I love a trashy reality show. Naked and Afraid is one of my all-time favorites. It is, if you don't know about it, 2 people. They are hopefully survivalists. They hopefully have survival skills. They are taken to some place that is just bananas that they have to survive in for 21 days, and they are naked. They only have a satchel, and they can bring 1 item. And if they're smart, they bring a pot and a fire starter or a machete or something. Often they're not smart, and it's just not great. But it's a lot of fun because they always pair up people this person loves guns and hunting and this person is a vegan yoga instructor and they're together for 20 and you're like, oh no, this is gonna end so badly, and it does. And it's so interesting to me because I would surely die in the second day. It's so fascinating to watch how they interact with people. It's just a lot of fun. So I really like that for just not whatever, I'm watching it. Also, RuPaul's Drag Race. So much fun. Just a delight to watch. People are so engaging and interesting, and so I'm not really guilty about that, but if I just need something fun to watch, I'll throw on RuPaul's Drag Race. That's great.
Speaking of Naked and Afraid and kind of those type of reality shows, RuPaul's Drag Race, I have to give a shout out to a couple of my coworkers in marketing. They got mad at me because they found out about this episode late because I didn't invite them on. But basically, Gina King, Marina Fernandez, my apologies, because they wanted, of course, to come on and talk about The Bachelor. Huge fans of that show, and I know they've been pushing me for ages to do an entire episode on The Bachelor. We really don't have anything Bachelor related in our collection, but we will have them on the podcast eventually.
I'm sure there's some sort of here's a date that The Bachelor went on and a romance novel from that you can get. Or
I think so.
Look at this romantic movie that you could rent from the library and borrow, and it'd be great. But also, The Bachelor.
Yeah, they sent me an angry worded email about it, so it's all good though.
Is that the way to get on the podcast?
I'm learning.
Really,
yes.
Just send me an email trashing me. Use a lot of 4-letter words, and I will invite you on the podcast. We'll just Okay. Caroline, how about you?
Yeah. So my mind immediately went to a specific movie area, which was made for TV Christmas movies. And we had a number of staff share that they also enjoy these. I know one that came up from former guest Beth Kilfoy was The 9 Lives of Christmas, which stars Brandon Routh playing a fireman, a female lead who wants to be a vet, and a couple of very adorable cats.
Brandon Routh, underrated Superman. But that movie, I've actually seen it.
And what did you think?
So Cheryl, by the way, is a huge fan of the Hallmark W Network Christmas movies. As a matter of fact, they had a special on in July called Christmas in July.
Oh, I'm aware, Bryce. I'm aware.
So unfortunately, I kind of cringed because I knew that's what would be on TV in our living room for that entire week. And it was. So I recently watched the movie. Lots of stuff where, of course, these two aren't meant to be together. But, of course, Brandon Routh is dating a woman that there should be no reason that he's with her, of course. And the guys at the fire hall are trying to tell him that he should maybe start seeing somebody else. And there's a cat in there. There's like two cats involved. And there's a lot of hijinks and mix-ups. But at the same time, I thought it, totally a guilty pleasure movie. I knew I was like, why am I watching this? But at the same time, I couldn't take my eyes off of it.
Yeah.
There's something about that Christmas setting that always hooks me in.
Absolutely. And an element of you know what's going to happen, but you want to see how it gets there and following that. So my choice, my pick that is in our collection is from the 90s, and it is called Borrowed Hearts. Have you seen this one?
No. What's it about?
Eric McCormick from Will and Grace is a hard-hearted businessman who needs a family to close a business deal.
As most business deals, you do need that stuff. Yeah.
Roma Downey from Touched by an Angel is a single mother who's just trying to take care of her strong-willed young daughter. So Eric McCormick offers Roma Downey a job playing his family so he can make this business deal, and then sparks fly.
What?
They move into his house.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert!
They move into his house. They the businessman. He comes in. He's there with them. They're pretending that they're in love. Hector Elizondo may or may not be a magical angel figure in the movie. It's ambiguous. And it's all taking place over Christmas. I watch it every year.
So that trope of they need to pretend to be all the time. Yes, you had me.
Yeah.
I am not a Christmas person. The holidays just lost on me. So if they could start doing romantic Halloween movies, I would be greatly into it.
Yeah.
But I will say, because I'm very bad at this Christmas stuff, I did recommend though an audiobook to the library that's called How the Dukes Stole Christmas. So if you're into these kind of Christmas things, there's also Christmas audiobooks that have romantic things that you can listen to. How great would that be? It's perfect.
I have to ask, and I'm sure it isn't, do the Dukes of Hazzard come into play with how the Dukes...
Shockingly, it's a historical romance, so the Dukes are actually more, historic figures rather than driving around in a fast red car with cut-off jeans.
Maybe, I'm sure there's lots of Dukes of Hazzard fan fiction then I clearly need to
I
read.
bet you there's a
Dukes of Hazzard Stealing Christmas.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If there isn't, I think we need to start writing
We can
that.
start right now and just start building this out.
Yeah. So, that Borrowed Hearts is my guilty pleasure that I am not guilty about at all.
I think my pick, so I recently saw this movie for the first time, and I'm a huge fan of really bad, trashy B movies. It's funny because you put in front of me hey Bryce, you can watch Casablanca, or you can watch my pick of Mac and Me for the third time. I would watch Mac and Me. So have either of you heard of Mac and Me?
Is that the robot?
No, close though.
Okay.
Basically, it's like an E.T. ripoff from the late 80s. So the movie was produced by McDonald's.
Nice.
And it's
No.
about a young boy who's in a wheelchair. Him and his family are moving to a new town, and he discovers an alien. So this alien family has crash landed.
Is it Mac Tonight?
No, unfortunately it
Oh,
isn't.
okay.
But I do remember Mac Tonight, though.
Is this how Big Mac's got their name? I don't...
No,
What's
I don't.
McDonald's connection?
No. Well, McDonald's connection basically is that there's this really awkward scene in the movie where there's a lot of breakdancing happening outside of McDonald's, and even the staff inside. Everybody's having a really, I don't even know how to explain it properly. Everybody's having a little too much fun in a McDonald's. Everybody's dancing, staff is dancing. A very young Jennifer Aniston it's apparently her very first on-screen role ever. She, I guess, is a background extra in this movie. We have it in our collection, believe it or not.
Wow.
If you get a chance, check out Mac and Me. It is like one of the worst movies you can watch. But at the same time, though, I'm a sucker for those movies, so I will watch them every day of the week.
Now, did you watch this? When did you first watch this movie?
I first watched it earlier this year. Like, I knew about it as a kid,
right,
and I always heard it was terrible. But Mystery Science Theater on Netflix was had an episode on Mac and Me. That's where I saw it for the first time.
Because I think there are some things around, like what you love when you're forming ideas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you still hold on to as you get older. But I like that this was something you came to.
I came to it. Most people actually know it from whenever Paul Rudd is on Conan. He shows the same clip of a boy in a wheelchair going off like the side of a cliff and into like a lake below. That is from Mac and Me. Yeah.
Okay, so I know this clip.
Yes, it's a very famous clip. Yeah, but yeah, it's terrible. But the movie is horrible in itself. But it's just cheesy fun, and I enjoy watching that stuff.
I watched the Bram Stoker's Dracula movie when I was like way too young to watch Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I've been trying to get friends to watch it with me, like for the longest time, because I want to know if it held up. But I also want to put other people, like subject other people to this movie, because I know it's probably going to be cheesy and terrible. But yeah, I think it's always really interesting to revisit things that you really enjoyed and just see like, oh no, this is not as good as I remember it being.
Absolutely.
Bryce, you are not alone with your love of 80s movies.
No.
Some staff chimed in. Meg DeForest, she says, I have some love for some 80s movies, like Earth Girls Are Easy. If I'm being critical, it's truly awful. But Gina Davis, Jeff Goldblum, with Jim Carrey and Damon Wayans. It has more heart than it has any right to, and the cheesiest musical scenes. Speaking of cheesy musical scenes, she goes on to mention Grease 2, Michelle Pfeiffer, and scenes about singing, about bowling, perfection. I agree. I am a huge fan of Grease 2.
Meg is now my favorite person in the entire world. Grease 2 is better than Grease 1.
Caroline, didn't you say that the other day?
I did.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I did.
Best friends now.
Yeah.
I love Grease 2 so much. Cool Rider.
Oh my God, Cool Rider.
Oh my gosh. It's such a great movie. And I honestly, I think it has a longer lasting power than the original Grease. And sorry to all the people who like Grease.
I sing Girl for All Seasons constantly.
Yes.
And one of my favorite things about Grease 2 is that there's the character of the Cool Rider, and he goes in disguise, and his disguise are motorcycle goggles. He's wearing see-through goggles on his face, and everyone is like, who is this guy? There's a song. There's an actual who's that guy?
Which is such a good song. But also, I think we've learned from comic books and other movies that if you put glasses on somebody, they're completely different. And
Clark Kent.
That's comic books. That's She's All That. You remove the glasses, she's suddenly a completely different woman.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful, terrible trope.
Yeah.
Also, Earth Girls Are Easy. So good. Jeff Goldblum was oddly extremely attractive in that movie, and I don't. That probably says too much about me. But,
I don't think so. I would say society has come to that collective decision on Jeff Goldblum.
Yes, but he's not dressed as like a weird alien. Normally.
Okay.
I mean, he's probably still a weird alien because in some ways he acts. He seems like a weird alien, but he's also.
Cheryl is also a huge fan of Earth Girls Are Easy, and
Cheryl has excellent taste. I'm just gonna
Cheryl
say
is also my new best friend. She sounds amazing. We can go listen to 90s country together and
watch
terrible movies.
Yeah,
it'd be great.
But I've seen the movie, and I'm not the biggest fan, but I can definitely understand the appeal of it anyway.
Yeah.
We also heard from Kyle Burley, who's talked about a genre of film that he enjoys, which is sometimes referred to as sharksploitation. That is to say, films in which the primary function of the characters is to be killed and eaten by a shark or sharks, or otherwise do their best to prevent this from happening. And he pointed to Jaws as the genre's lone masterpiece, but the rest range from the relatively competent and effective The Shallows meters and 47 meters down to the depths of the Sharknado franchise. Have you seen any sharksploitation movies?
Sure have. The Shallows is actually a pretty good movie.
I thought it was good.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything...
Especially a movie where it's basically just one character.
Yeah, it's one character. Yeah, it's
keeps your attention. Blake
Lively's in it, and it's basically her battling a shark for like an hour and a half.
Yeah,
it's
a shark who like I don't think this is a spoiler, but it sometimes when I was watching it, at first it's like dangerous situations, but then it seems like the shark is actually like going after her intentionally. Like it gets upset and like starts targeting her, and I thought that was interesting.
One other one too he also brought up, I have to mention because it's a total guilty pleasure movie of mine, is Deep Blue Sea. And he mentions that, I mean, I guess this is a spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert!
I mean, the movie's been out for 20 years. Sam Jackson's death scene in it alone is worth watching it for.
I think you just want to use the spoiler alert sound effect.
Definitely.
Spoiler alert!
So we got a lot of suggestions from staff and listeners of the podcast, and unfortunately we couldn't include all of their picks in this episode. So what we will do is we will have a link to those in our show notes, including their comments on why they thought it was a guilty pleasure pick.
Absolutely. So before we get to our roundtable questions, Bryce, can you let everyone know about the big interview that we have lined up for our September 27th episode?
Caroline, I've known that we've been getting this interview for over a year, and I've just been like so excited about it. And right now everyone is talking about the hit show on Netflix, Mindhunter. And on our next episode, we will be speaking with the original Mindhunter, the man himself that the show is actually based on, famed FBI criminal profiler and author, Mr. John Douglas. So, of course, he's going to be coming to Edmonton on October 28th as part of our Forward Thinking Speaker Series, and we get to chat with him about his career and some of those real-life interviews that he did with some of history's most notorious serial killers, which, of course, you see on Netflix. So if you have a question that you would like us to ask Mr. Douglas, please email us at podcast@epl.ca. We will include those. I've got a bunch of questions myself. Caroline, how excited are you for this episode?
I'm really excited. In the past, both with our previous interviews of Anthony Ray Hinton and Chris Nowinski, we've asked them, who would you like to play you in the feature film version?
Yeah.
And this time that question's off the table because he's been portrayed in so many different shows and movies, and just his career, his experiences. I'm really looking forward to talking with him.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into our quick roundtable questions. Brittany, aside from books, movies, and library items, what is one of your biggest guilty pleasures?
I think podcasts and video games are probably the two that I have. I love a really good podcast. I like ones that tackle friendship and social issues. I also love ones about murder. So it's really runs the gamut. And then for video games, I love horror video games so much. And I'm very bad with gore, so I can't do gory games. But I think anytime that there's really interesting games, especially if they're FMV games, which is the ones where you get to watch like the movie as well, oh my gosh, we have played some truly terrible ones. One I would definitely recommend is Contradiction Spot the Liar. It's a lot of fun. Definitely play it with a group of friends over the course of a few hours together. It'll be really interesting. Some of the things are technically not contradictions. It's still a great time, and I have a lot of interesting conspiracy theories about it, so hit me up after and we can talk about them.
You just said some magic words with conspiracy theories.
Love them.
Both Bryce and I like to dive into that world.
Yeah, huge fan. Caroline.
Yeah. I came up with two, so I guess they're my biggest guilty pleasures. The first is fuzzy socks. I just really love having very soft socks. It not so much in the summer because I get quite warm, but now that we're heading into the cooler months, very excited about socks. And then my second one is that I really like doing coat check. And I know that I
like an event?
Like an event.
Like running the coat check?
No, using it. Like checking my coat.
Yeah.
Because you don't need to do it. You can just carry your coat, but you check it, and then you just feel so free.
I'm not going to shame you in any way, but that's one of the most wild responses that I never would have pictured.
No.
Like, I never, ever, if you had said, like, what are some... I would never have picked that. I understand why it is a guilty pleasure of yours, and absolutely, more coat checks everywhere. I also like that both Bryce and I were like, you like to volunteer.
Yeah, that's what...
A coat check? And you're just like, are you secretly looking through people's pockets? Like, I don't understand.
No, this is my thing. My guilty pleasures is I'm really big on volunteering, but that's not it at all. I like doing it. Usually they are volunteers. Like when I'm thinking of like at the Butterdome craft sale, there are different groups that run these things, and you don't need to. I think part of it is because I'm a transit user. I don't really drive, and so you don't have your car to leave your coat in. So there I am with my heavy coat, and then I'm a larger person, and so trying to squeeze into a seat with the coat as well by the time I do this, but it's completely unnecessary. You don't need to do it. It's extra, and that's why I think there's that guilt element of it. But when I do it, I just feel quite fancy.
Nice. I was definitely not expecting that coat check answer, but
I think it's my favorite.
okay though.
Well, I'm glad I shared it. How about you, Bryce?
Mine is I shouldn't feel guilty about this at all, but I know I don't think it's frowned upon. But I love going to the movies by myself.
Oh, you're at the wrong place if you want guilt for that, because I do that all the time.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't start doing it until I was like an adult, but like the first time I did, I was like, oh, this kind of feels weird. I have nobody else to talk to. I love going to, like, as much as I love going with my wife, Cheryl, a great time going to the movies, but sometimes, if she's busy with school, I'll just kind of get out of the house a little bit and just go hit up a daytime matinee. That is like my favorite thing to do.
I used to love doing that when I was at university and had a class schedule at different times, and you got into the habit of doing things in the afternoon, and I was there usually with a lot of seniors, and I had a great time.
Yeah, every now and then I'll have like the odd Monday off, and I always go to a movie during the daytime, and it's like me and like 5 other random people just sitting in the theater and enjoying the movie to ourselves.
Yeah.
I think that's extremely underrated, though, because I think being confident enough to go and do things by yourself, whether it's going to have dinner by yourself or going to a movie by yourself or a fringe show or a concert, like you mentioned, going to see Chicago. I think that's something that people like sometimes have to work up the courage to do. I love a good solo date, like go and take myself to a movie or something. It's really a lot of fun, and I don't feel any shame about doing it. I will say I prefer going to see like a fringe show or a movie with somebody else, just because I want to immediately dissect everything that happened, and having another person makes that a lot easier to do, but it's nice.
Yeah, definitely. I haven't worked up the courage to go to dinner by myself. Every now and then, like if, I get to go to a marketing conference or something, there's always like the restaurant downstairs in the hotel, and I'm always like, I'll just call room service. I know. It's something I need to work up to. I know I shouldn't. I know it's okay to do. But
It definitely feels weird.
Yeah.
There's definitely the stigma around, oh, did you get ditched? Did your date not show up? Like there's definitely a stigma around it, which is why I think that more people have to do it. But also, what a great time to like take a book, read a nice book, enjoy the meal by yourself, order that thing that nobody else ever wants to get, or order that thing that you hate sharing because you want to eat all of it. Eat all of the arancini or whatever it is that you want. Eat the entire thing of cheese. Like that is, the world is your lobster. Like go do it.
Yeah. If you take one thing away from this podcast, eat all the cheese. That's the message.
Unless
today.
you're lactose intolerant, and then please don't eat all the cheese.
Don't eat all the cheese. Make the best choice for you.
PSA warning on Overdue Finds.
Yeah, we're going to have to walk. So our next roundtable question, because you're so active on social media, we wanted to ask, have you ever discovered a title through social media? And if so, what was it?
Yes, absolutely. And so actually one of my favorite trilogies of all time I discovered because of social media. So Sam Meggs, wonderful author. You can get her books here at the library. She and I were talking on social media, and she recommended the Paradox trilogy by Rachel Bach, which you can also get from the library. I know because I constantly get it from the library. And it's amazing. If you are a fan, especially of like Mass Effect, you're going to love this trilogy. It is about a mercenary woman in space on a spaceship. She has to wear sort of a mech suit, but it's not like a Gundam. Like if you're one of those people who's like, oh, I don't really want to watch a Pacific Rim type thing, it's not that. Don't worry. It's just a really cool suit. And what I really enjoy about it is that it is a woman who is not the most likable at all times, and she's kind of gruff, and she has a lot of character flaws, and I really enjoy that because it's a space that women are not often put in books like this, and it's really great, and it's just a really fun space action trilogy, and I highly recommend it. It's really good, and if you enjoyed the Mass Effect trilogy and you played as female Shepard, yes, absolutely, this is your book. You want this book, find it immediately, go rent it from the borrow it from the library, and if it is already being borrowed, it's probably me, and I'm sorry.
They're like, hurry up and return it.
I discovered earlier this year, I saw that Carol Ma, who we mentioned earlier, who works here at EPL, she shared that she was reading the book Chop Suey Nation by Anne Huey, a book that looks at Chinese restaurants that were opened by immigrants to Canada and North America, and the food creations that they created to appeal to this North American audience. And that's where we get the North American Chinese cuisine, which is pretty much basically, if you think about any Chinese restaurant that you went to growing up, it's the food that never appeared in China. And why all the restaurants are so similar. Things like ginger beef was created in Canada.
In
Calgary,
wow.
yeah.
Wow.
And looking at why all these small towns in Canada have these identical Chinese restaurants. And she did a road trip looking at all these restaurants and the stories, and then kind of tied it into her own history, and just really, really interesting book.
Nice.
I'm definitely checking that out.
Yeah,
shout out to Linda Zhang and the Royal Alberta Museum, because they had a Chop Suey in the Prairies exhibit a few years ago. That really sparked my love of doing research on this and looking more into it. So this is 100% my alley. So thank you for that recommendation.
Yeah, thank you, Carol.
Yeah. So, Brittany, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a blast.
Thank you so much for having me on. I was happy to finally be able to come and just yell about books and
I love it.
talk about the library.
I love it.
Where can people find out more about you, follow you on Twitter, or is there anything you want to plug?
Absolutely. Easiest way to get a hold of me is obviously to follow me on Twitter or Instagram. I'm at Brittle. That's Britl. So just, I don't know, stay tuned, follow. Reach out, tell me if you listen to any of these things, tell me if you disagree with my Grease 2 opinions, which I'm sorry, but you're wrong. Grease 2 is amazing.
Seconded.
Yeah. So, and that motion has been passed.
Yeah. So we hope that you've enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't, we encourage you to hit the subscribe button so that you automatically get new episodes. You can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and most importantly, tell a friend about the show.
Yeah, help spread the word about Overdue Finds in the library. Don't forget that we'll have a link to everything that we talked about in the show notes today, and there's going to be a lot of them. Don't forget that we'll have a link to everything that we talked about in the show notes today. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, we will have some extra guilty pleasure picks provided from staff and other listeners to the show. So if you want to share your guilty pleasures with us, please email us at podcast@epl.ca, and we'll include that on our next show. And, of course, if you have any questions for Mr. John Douglas, email us there as well. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.